Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Western Massachusetts People's Tribunal. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah. Before we start, we're going to go through some logistics and security information, as well as a presentation of our community guidelines. So we are a sold-out event. Please wear your masks at all times throughout the event, and also be brave in time of political silencing. This is a strong, united community, and we're here to uplift each other in this common struggle. As such, it's important to listen to learn and to speak from the heart, and intention is at the center of this. We'd also like to emphasize that although we are engaging in a tribunal, we very much reject any logics of the legal system or any carceral logics. This feels particularly important to what we're doing today because we're engaging in a judicial process in a system that technically usually leads to punitive concerns, and this is something that we completely reject. We want to imagine alternative rehabilitative outcomes that are outside the box of these carceral processes of thinking. Finally, we'd also like to emphasize that we are here to care for one another as we create a world that we want to see, fighting to end the complicity of our institutions that perpetuate violence and oppression around the world. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. We are here today to challenge the complicity of our institutions in the systematic violence against oppressed people around the world through acts of land theft, forced displacement, and genocide. Here in the area colonially known as the Connecticut River Valley, we stand on stolen land where colonial powers attempted to dispossess and erase the history and existence of Indigenous peoples. While we fight in collaboration with oppressed people around the world for their liberation, we also stand in solidarity with the Indigenous peoples native to this area, specifically the Pecumtuck, Nonotuck, and Nipmuc peoples. We draw the parallels of the subtler colonial logic that justifies all instances of land theft and extraction. We call on every institution, every leader, and every one of us to actively reconcile these historic and ongoing harms. We honor the right of Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination, and we understand our responsibility to participate in practices of resistance and revolution grounded in care and justice to support the liberation of all people at home and abroad. Thank you.
As we gather here today, I welcome you to ground yourself with a breath. A deep inhalation and exhalation. The matters we discuss are complex and challenging. As we convene with today's proceedings, there are likely to be strong feelings and emotions, as well as missteps and perhaps even a hiccup and a bit of technological difficulty. This is a part of the human experience because a tribunal is very much a human endeavor. And in the spirit of transformative justice, we are not looking for perfection, but rather for intention and for human connection. Israel is committing a genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. The gruesome culmination of decades of ethnic cleansing, dispossession, erasure, humiliation, war crimes, and torture. What every human rights organization and all people of consciousness recognize clearly is being willfully denied by almost every institution positioned to intervene in the genocide. As members of and contributors to these institutions, which are universities, businesses, and governments at every level, we have a responsibility to expose and oppose our leaders' indefensible complicity. The Western Mass People's Tribunal aims to contribute to this project by illuminating and exposing the material and ideological resources that the Valley institutions have committed to the slaughter of thousands. Our universities and governments will someday undoubtedly be held accountable, but we must do everything we can to accelerate this timeline. The People's Tribunal is an opportunity to organize and to build towards this goal. In light of our institution's supports for genocide, their refusal to engage with our democratic demands, and their backing of violence at home and abroad, we are compelled to build our own popular institutions, to pursue justice and to present evidence of their complicity and to hold those most responsible to account. Today, the people are putting the institution of the Connecticut River Valley on trial. Organizing to disrupt current violence requires that we build community and that we understand the history of the mechanisms of these institutions that we seek to change. To everyone who recognizes the need to build such community, you've come to the right place. Our tribunal is a grassroots, community-based forum for gathering evidence, sharing testimony, and pursuing justice and accountability beyond the constraints of the official state institutions that perpetuate violence, exploitation, and injustice with impunity. Although we are utilizing the structure of a tribunal, we reject the carceral violence of the legal system. We are here today to begin the arduous process of dismantling institutions of injustice and constructing alternative frameworks rooted in solidarity and in the historical traditions of anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism, and decolonization. The tribunal proceedings will last approximately 3 hours. During this time, we will witness a total of 6 cases from various student-led, worker-led, and community-based organizations across the Connecticut River Valley. The aforementioned cases will be prosecuted by members of the following organizations: Western Mass Jewish Voices for Peace, Stop L3 Harris Northampton, Science for the People, Dissenter STEM Caucus, Students for Justice in Palestine at Smith, Hampshire, and the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine, and the Professional Staff Union's Palestine Solidarity Caucus. Round of applause for these individuals. These organizations represent a critical contingent of the Palestine Solidarity movement here in our local area. Before we explain who else is joining us here today and what roles everyone will take, we want to share a video recording from an esteemed guest, Noura Erakat. Noura Erakat is a human rights attorney and a professor at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, in the Department of Africana Studies and the program in criminal justice. She's also co-founding editor of Jadalia, an electronic magazine on the Middle East that combines scholarly expertise and local knowledge. She recorded this video for us to share with you today.
Greetings to the UMass organizers, to the students, to the faculty, to the staff, to the community who have poured themselves in to manifest the world that we want to live in. That world is only possible through our organizing, as there will be nobody coming to save us. There will be no institutions acting in our best interest. There will be no courts that function without our protest. And so I applaud you in moving forward to hold the institution that you are at to account, because all of us can be the most powerful and the most agentic when we act locally, where we are the agents of change. And at UMass, you are all agents of change at UMass and beyond, but particularly at UMass. By the time the I'm going to call it a ceasefire because at least the bombardment has stopped. The genocide has not ended. But by the time the Israeli-US ceasefire went into effect, we were in a situation where a US-Israeli vision was being imposed onto the Palestinians and onto the rest of the world. Now, note that this agreement, as welcome as it is by Palestinians, and as it should be, because it means that that the skies will not break, but the way that it was imposed is that it was not multilateral. It should have been a multilateral ceasefire agreement, meaning it should have been an agreement that was facilitated by a global community that was in accordance with international law and norms, that could be held to account by mechanisms that were reliable. And instead, what we get is the imposition of a unilateral vision to basically end the bombardment on Israeli and American terms, where Palestinians will not be guaranteed their right to self-determination, where Israel will not be obligated to withdraw to particular lines on a particular timetable, where breaches of the ceasefire will not be met with meaningful consequence, and where most significantly, there will be no accountability for genocide that went on for 733 days. And so the reason that the multilateral mechanisms are so significant here is that the United States, particularly the Biden and the Trump administration, deliberately destroyed these multilateral mechanisms and access to international law through the attack on the International Court of Justice. We remember when John Kirby of the Biden administration called the South Africa's case against Israel as without any merit whatsoever. It was denigrating them. When in regard to the ICC arrest warrants, where we saw both the Biden administration and the Trump administration malign the International Criminal Court, pressure the Office of the Prosecutor not to pursue the cases against Gallant and Netanyahu, and then under the Trump administration to pass an executive order to sanction the prosecutor Karim Khan, to sanction Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, and to sanction 3 Palestinian human rights organizations that filed the first ICC petition for apartheid and genocide in November 2023. That's the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, Al-Haq, and Al-Mizan. In addition to the ICJ and the ICC, the Biden and the Trump administration made a mockery of the United Nations when it used its veto power collectively 6 times to prevent and to stem a ceasefire resolution that could have been in accordance with international norms and could have been overseen by international institutions. They did so on purpose in order to sideline the UN as a global actor, and instead to have the space that they have had to make this imposition of a ceasefire where they seek to absolve themselves first and foremost, where they seek to absolve heads of state, where they seek to absolve the weapons manufacturers, where they seek to absolve the media corporations that manufactured consent that incited genocide day in and day out, where they seek to absolve the heads of state, where they seek to absolve the dual nationals who film themselves gleefully committing war crimes against Palestinians in mass. And this outcome is unacceptable. What the world wants to do is now march in this direction because they just want to be done with the situation, as if it's not their fault the situation existed, as if it's not the responsibility of these states and of their complicity and of almost 8 decades of talking out of both sides of their mouth to both speak of Palestinian human rights and the right to self-determination and simultaneously provide Israel with unequivocal military, economic, and diplomatic support. And yet they want to sweep this under the rug. And what we must make sure of is that everyone and everything is held to account. So I applaud you at UMass for taking that charge, for moving forward, to hold your university to account, to hold those who are enabling the transfer of weapons, for those who are investing in death making, for those who are in alliance with Israeli universities that are participating in that death making and holding on to the bodies of Palestinian corpses as hostages. These are all imbrications that we have direct access to and control over. And so I applaud you. I wish you the best of luck. May you have a successful tribunal for these coming days, and may we all be victorious. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to that video. I just wanted to point out that this tribunal has been 9 months in the making. Originally, we thought that we would present these cases to you back in May. However, given the amount of negative response and of threats that we received from members of our local community, we decided to reprioritize the safety and well-being of our community members and of our fellow organizers, and to do our due diligence and to create a more robust safety protocol that could enable us to share our cases with more people, whilst also ensuring that we have protected everyone to the best of our capacity. And we're looking forward to sharing that information with you today. Okay, we will now explain the different roles within our tribunal framework. The prosecution is responsible for investigating crimes and presenting their findings as evidence in court. And in our proceedings today, they will be representing the people, not the state. The goal of the prosecution is to seek justice and accountability within the bounds of the law, not merely to convict. The prosecution is expected to serve the public interest and to act with integrity and balanced judgment, as they will strive to protect the innocent and convict the guilty for the common good of humanity. The prosecution teams also include expert witnesses and testimonies from those who are most impacted by the alleged crimes. You, the audience, are the jury. The jury is responsible for thoughtfully listening to the evidence presented today, noting the facts that have been established, and drawing inferences from those facts to ultimately make an informed decision as to whether the defendants are guilty or not guilty. Our tribunal also has 3 judges who are sitting in the front. Our judges are George Abraham, Hannah Mushabek, and Isabel Espinal. George Abraham is a Palestinian-American poet, essayist, critic, and performance artist who is currently working as writer-in-residence at Amherst College. Hannah Mushabek is a second-generation Palestinian-American author and book worker who runs Interlink Publishing, the only Palestinian-owned publisher in the United States, alongside her wonderful family. And Isabel Espinal is an arts and humanities coordinator and academic librarian for Afro-American Studies, Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx Studies, and Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She's also a longtime community advocate and organizer working to uplift Palestinian voices and promote cross-cultural dialogue. A round of applause for our judges. Within the context of our tribunal, the judges serve as knowledge keepers with the capacity to provide critical insights gained from their educational and community-based backgrounds, as well as from their lived experiences. The jury finds the accused guilty or liable. However, it is up to the judges to sentence the defendant. The defense is decidedly absent from our proceedings. In a traditional court setting, an absent defense would result in a bench warrant for the defense arrest. Failure to appear in court can happen for a number of reasons, from confusion about the court date to logistical problems and also transportation issues to willful defiance. However, before explaining more, it seems appropriate to introduce the person who will guide us through the tribunal process, our master or comrade of ceremonies, the Joker.
Thank you. Hello? Thank you, comrade, for that generous introduction. I am the Joker. I intend to add a touch of unpredictability and to connect you all through a broken fourth wall. If you don't play poker or pinochle, the Joker is the card that can become any other card in the deck. At times, I will take on different roles, acting as a facilitator, understudy, and even devil's advocate, giving voice to the uninvited guest. Speaking of that uninvited guest, while the defense is not here to account for their actions and inactions, I intend to make their absence known. Back in April, when we attempted to hold the tribunal on campus at UMass, we delivered our subpoena to the UMass administration and invited them to present their case. But they declined our invitation. And soon after, we were targeted by fascist, Zionist agitators who threatened to bring violence to our tribunal and to call ICE on our organizers and local community. Given our positions within the UMass system as members of the UMass community, we thought our educational institutions would protect us and our right to free speech. But instead, they ignored these credible threats and they told us to reach out to the local police department for their support. The local police, the Amherst PD, the Hadley PD, the State Pig Troll. I don't know about you, but I don't think it makes very much sense to invite the same cops who arrested me and my comrades for exercising our constitutional rights to protect us against a group of bigots and dingbats who loudly support violence and state-sanctioned kidnapping. And as you can see here today, we did not let ourselves be intimidated, and we did not ask the cops for help. We are the ones who keep us safe. We are here today to create alternative institutions of accountability and justice for the people, by the people. So what better way to accomplish this than through a show trial? And I mean both a show and a trial. A show out in the open, transparent, accountable to the public, and, not but or, and a trial where evidence that is real is presented to support the charges. The institutions in questions have repressed our resistance to genocide using shows with no evidence and using secret trials with no accountability. Our show trial, the Western Mass People's Tribunal, is a public court of appeals that is not controlled by the aristocracy or the bourgeoisie, but by the common people. The defense may be absent from today's proceedings, but since they've had control over the public narrative this entire time, it seems justified to go ahead and let the prosecution make their case. And with that, it is my honor to call forth the prosecution team from Jewish Voice for Peace to present their case, charging the UMass administration, I believe, with accomplice to genocide.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Gonzalez, and I'm here representing Jewish Voice for Peace, Western Massachusetts. Thank you. I'm here both as a Jew and a UMass community member, along with my colleagues and comrades, to charge UMass Amherst with the weaponization of anti-Semitism against Palestinian students, faculty, staff, and community members and their allies. UMass administrators are directly responsible for the dangerous conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that is currently present on our campus. We have seen administrators collaborate with the Anti-Defamation League, explicitly align our university with a wider pro-Israel coalition, and dismiss real violence against Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, and pro-Palestinian students while prioritizing Jewish feelings about the pro-Palestinian movement. All of these actions are in alignment with a discredited definition of anti-Semitism known as the IHRA definition. The IHRA definition, which stands for International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, incorrectly classifies criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. Of the 11 examples that accompany the IHRA definition, several classify criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. To list a few, it is anti-Semitic to, quote, hold Jews collectively responsible for the actions of Israel. But to that I say, if all Jews are at risk because of the actions of the Jewish nation state, then that state is responsible for our safety. It is also anti-Semitic, they claim, to deny Jews the right to self-determination. And to this I ask, what about Palestinian self-determination? It is also anti-Semitic, they claim, to draw comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. As my fellow JVP member and a local historian frames it, quote, why is it anti-Semitic if one believes that there may be, in fact, some valid comparisons? Watching 2.3 million Palestinians trapped in an area 25 by 7.5 miles at its widest, from which they could not flee, and being bombarded, denied sufficient food, water, and medical treatment does, in fact, remind me of the Nazi ghettos and dehumanization of their victims, and disregard for civilian life and suffering. And finally, they claim it is anti-Semitic to say that Zionism is racism. Israel was founded as a Jewish state, where Jews have full rights and Palestinians do not, where any Jewish person can claim citizenship. Even many of us in this room could claim citizenship despite never having stepped foot there, while Palestinians expelled in the Nakba do not have the right of return. This is apartheid and racism. The IHRA definition has been discredited and publicly denounced by the author of the definition himself, the Massachusetts legislature, and hundreds of Holocaust and genocide scholars, including many Jewish scholars. According to the Human Rights Watch, quote, the IHRA definition has often been used to wrongly label criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic and thus chill and sometimes suppress nonviolent protest, activism, and speech critical of Israel. This definition paints Israel as a representative for all Jews and Israel as a solely Jewish country, both of which are untrue. Speaking against Israel is not a crime against Jews. And now I move to Exhibit 1. Collaboration with pro-Israel parties. On October 26, 2023, Marty Meehan, the president of the University of Massachusetts system, was one of 18 founders of a resolution to, quote, stand together with Israel against Hamas. This coalition aligned our campus with Israel and Zionism from the first month of the genocide, making it difficult for UMass to declare neutrality or suggest that this was a complex issue disconnected from the campus community, which it would later attempt to do shamelessly. Not only 1 month later, UMass administrators participated in at least 2 events with representatives of the ADL, or Anti-Defamation League, an organization now infamous for attacking free speech, weaponizing the memory of the Holocaust, and failing to acknowledge right-wing anti-Semitism, even when it's giving a Sig Heil in front of an audience like this one. One such event on campus included a discussion promoting the ADL's position that any criticism of Israel or the political ideology of Zionism constitutes anti-Semitism and should be punished. In a case presented against UMass for anti-Palestinian discrimination, attorneys Miriam Nunberg and Radhika Nainoth put it clearly, quote, The use of the IHRA definition and the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that it emboldens creates just that, a zero-sum game, wherein to be pro-Palestinian, you must be anti-Jewish, and to be pro-Jewish necessarily means being anti-Palestinian. This is a false dichotomy that has enabled the term anti-Semitism to be weaponized against Palestinians and their allies for expressing their desire for Palestinian freedom, opposition to the genocide of their people, and views on Israel and Zionism. Exhibit B, the false assumption that Jews are threatened by pro-Palestine protests at UMass. In January of this year, the Massachusetts law firm Prince Lobel released a quote-unquote independent review of the administration's violent militant response to the peaceful Gaza Solidarity encampment of May 2024. Here, they highlight the quote-unquote perceived pain and anxiety experienced by some Jewish students and faculty who felt threatened by the protesters' chants and slogans. We must recognize that there is a difference between perceived and real threats, and especially so in response to political rhetoric versus real threats of physical violence. Even Prince Lobel acknowledged that there was no threat of violence to the community until the police arrived. However, they later affirmed the university's violent crackdown, writing, "We acknowledge that by acting as quickly and decisively as it did, the administration provided relief to some, possibly many, Jewish students and faculty who felt threatened or alienated by the encampments." Yeah. We reject the assumption that Jews view pro-Palestine protests as threatening because the protesters are anti-Semitic or because Jewish students have an inherent, unbreakable connection to the state of Israel. The law firm is essentializing Jewish people as a homogenous group and isolating them apart from the campus community in support of Palestinian freedom, which, like our movement, is made up of many Jews. Furthermore, as outlined by the previously mentioned case presented against UMass for discrimination, the university itself created a hostile environment for Middle Eastern and pro-Palestinian students during this time period. They repeatedly dismissed urgent concerns over several students' physical safety and general welfare while they were being harassed, doxxed, and sent death threats and other explicit threats of violence. UMass provided no protection to these students. We reject the overwhelming focus on protecting discomfort of Jewish students while neglecting the real needs of Middle Eastern, Muslim, and Palestinian students and their allies. And finally, to conclude, we demand that UMass cease all discriminatory investigations of students, faculty, and staff on the basis of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. We encourage anyone concerned about the weaponization of anti-Semitism on campus to join us, JVP Western Mass, in organizing against the Massachusetts Special Commission on Combating Anti-Semitism, which will soon submit recommendations for institutions of higher education, along with previous recommendations for K through 12, to adopt the IHRA definition statewide. Finally, we urge UMass to drop the IHRA definition and instead adopt the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, which was co-authored by a late UMass faculty member, Alon Confino, and signed by hundreds of scholars of Jewish studies in the Holocaust. It provides several examples of incidents that are not anti-Semitic, including boycott, divestment, and sanctions, supporting the Palestinian demand for justice, criticizing or opposing Zionism as a form of nationalism. And it says, political speech does not have to be measured, proportional, tempered, or reasonable to be protected under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Jerusalem Declaration holds that, quote, while anti-Semitism has certain distinctive features, the fight against it is inseparable from the overall fight against all forms of discrimination. In this vein, we suggest that administrators pursue training on anti-Semitism, like the recently published Parcio, quote, Curriculum on Anti-Semitism from a Framework of Collective Liberation, which is devoted to understanding and challenging anti-Semitism, grounded in a deep commitment to justice and dignity for all people. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jewish Voice for Peace. I noticed some of y'all are taking notes. I just wanted to throw in, we have a whole bunch of pens down here, since there's gonna be a lot more details in the next 5 cases. All right, next, we will call forth the prosecution from Stop L3 Harris, who is going to present their case charging the L3 Harris capitalist class and the city of Northampton with accomplice to genocide.
Thank you. We are here representing Stop L3 Harris NoHo, a collective of individuals in Western Mass who are organizing to shut down the weapons factory hiding in plain sight in our small progressive city and to disrupt the global war machine. L3 Harris Technologies is currently the 11th largest weapons manufacturer in the world, and 76% of its revenue is generated from contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense, which includes foreign military sales. In today's tribunal, we are charging L3 Harris at large, as well as the city of Northampton, for allowing a branch of L3 Harris to operate in our backyard. To start, we are charging Chris Kubasik, the CEO of L3 Harris, with aiding and abetting the genocide of the Palestinian people by profiting from the sale of war technologies that are knowingly used to kill civilians and keep Palestinians under a state of apartheid by the Israeli military. Our first piece of evidence is an open letter that Kubasik wrote to the leaders of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency on January 15th, 2025, to express his desire to help the Doge make America's national defense ecosystem great again. He wrote, quote, "Victory in this new era of great power competition will be determined by the ability to fuse software, artificial intelligence, and hardware in ways that give our warfighters decision dominance or the capability to sense, understand, decide, and act and assess faster and more effectively than any adversary. In other words, shorten the kill chain." Shame. In his letter, Kubasik then goes on to lobby Doge to cut or change regulations to ease and shorten the process by which the Department of Defense awards contracts to weapons manufacturers like L3 Harris, thereby increasing company profits. In a world where L3 Harris supplies weapons to an apartheid state that is mass murdering innocent, defenseless civilians living under occupation, it is harrowing to consider a world in which this company is given the tools and funding to create even deadlier weapons and surveillance technologies. Kubasik is a war criminal in disguise. He does not care how many people get killed, only that he can profit off of their deaths. And profit they do. For our second piece of evidence, we present the transcript of an L3 Harris conference call held on April 25th, 2024, regarding L3 Harris's earnings from the first financial quarter of 2024. In the call, Kubasik celebrated the company's growth following Israel's most recent escalation in its genocidal war on Gaza. He said, quote, "It was about 16 months ago when we announced this acquisition with Aerojet Rocketdyne. There was no conflict in Israel. People thought Ukraine would be done. Nobody anticipated $900 billion of defense spending for 2024. When I look at where we are now, the business case gets better and better. I think by the time we get to 2026, 2027, if all stays as is, it's going to really turn out to be a great acquisition." In 2024, L3 Harris reported a 10% annual revenue increase to $21.3 billion. Chris Kubasik is a war profiteer with blood on his hands. Weapons with L3 Harris components have been used extensively to kill civilians in the Gaza genocide. L3 Harris also provides phone tracking devices and other surveillance technologies to the IDF for use at military checkpoints. Here at home, L3 Harris is regularly contracted to provide those same surveillance technologies to U.S. Customs and Border Protection and ICE. Given Israel's human rights abuses, the sale of weapons to the Israeli military is in violation of several international laws and trade agreements.
In 2001, L3 Harris acquired the Northampton company Cole Morgan, a local optics manufacturer founded in 1916, which for decades built periscopes for U.S. Navy submarines. Today, L3 Harris KEO in Northampton develops photonic masts, next-generation optics, and advanced sensors for the U.S. Navy's nuclear submarine fleet, which are essential to the core functions of Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs, the most lethal leg of the U.S. nuclear triad. We filed a FOIA request and found that 2 years prior to the merger between L3 Harris and Cole Morgan, the city of Northampton entered into a tax increment financing, or TIF, agreement with Cole Morgan, which gave the company a 5% annual tax benefit to support Cole Morgan's relocation and expansion to L3 Harris KEO's facility on Prince Street near the Northampton Community Garden. In exchange for the tax breaks, Cole Morgan agreed to add 30 new permanent jobs with a preference to qualified residents of Northampton. The city maintained the TIF agreement even after Cole Morgan was bought by multi-billion-dollar company L3 Harris. The TIF agreement was prematurely dissolved in 2014 because L3 Harris did not comply with the terms. Over the course of the tax agreement, the city of Northampton lost $70,000 in tax revenue, money which could have been used to fund our schools or other services that benefit our community. In 2018, the former Northampton mayor, David Narkowitz, signed an executive policy order to establish a citywide commitment to reduce and eventually eliminate any and all ties to the nuclear weapons industry. This commitment is not possible as long as L3 Harris operates in Northampton. We charge the city government of Northampton with aiding and abetting genocide by giving L3 Harris tax breaks and allowing L3 Harris to operate in Northampton in violation of its own laws. Many Northampton residents are in opposition to the crimes committed by L3 Harris, and there's a growing movement to replace institutions like L3 Harris with resources that benefit, rather than target, our community members in Northampton, at our southern border, in Palestine, and beyond. We call an expert witness Nick Modern, member of Demilitarized Western Mass, River Valley for Palestine, and Veterans for Peace Chapter 413, to speak about local resistance to L3 Harris and alternatives to war profiteering.
Good morning. There are two types of protests that go on at L3 Harris Technologies, 50 Prince Street in Northampton. The first type is a one-day-a-week standout, every Wednesday called the Early Bird Protest. It happens from 6:30 a.m. to 7:15 a.m. when the workers arrive for the day shift at the plant. The protesters call on L3 to convert to peace work and to stop supplying weapons to Israel to enable its genocide against the Palestinian people. The next protest is this coming Wednesday, a pre-Halloween protest, 6:30 to 7:15 p.m., please wear black. The second type of protests have included blockades, die-ins, and rallies, as follows. This is not an exclusive list of protests that have occurred there. October 12, 2023, a 5-hour blockade in which 5 protesters locked themselves down to boat trailers and a boat that were positioned across both entrances of the plant. The 5 were arrested. June 6, 2024, a 6-hour blockade in which 4 protesters locked themselves to a concrete-filled pickup truck positioned in front of the L3 loading dock. The 4 were arrested. July 3rd, 2024, protesters from a variety of groups held a die-in against the genocide against the Palestinian people. That was at L3. There were no arrests. March 19th, 2025, five protesters occupied the L3 reception area, demanding to speak to L3 CEO Chris Kubasik about supplying weapons to Israel, and they threw fake money stained with red paint around the reception area. The five were arrested. Four of the protesters will go on trial in Northampton on November 18th, 2025. May 1st, 2025, protesters from a variety of groups marched from the L3 Harris plant to the Northampton City Hall, protesting a tax break to L3 and calling on L3 to convert to piecework. The protest was coordinated with a similar protest at an L3 plant in Brighton, United Kingdom. August 20th, 2025, 30 protesters blocked the L3 Harris entrances, laid fake blood down on the street, shrouded bundles representing dead Palestinian children, and crime scene and caution tape. 2 were arrested. Christian Sorensen, a highly respected researcher and writer on the U.S. war industry, recommends in his Mapping the Business of War that L3 in Northampton convert to making imaging masks and motors for submersibles used in scientific exploration and ocean monitoring, that they make range finding and imaging systems for maritime safety and international commerce and for recreation, and that they make cameras and imaging enhancing technology for habitat monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Last month, the Northampton City Council voted to divest from companies profiting from Israeli genocide in Palestine, including L3 Harris. This is a woo! Yeah! This is a positive step towards ending Northampton's complicity in genocide, but we urge further action. We call on Northampton residents and the Northampton city government to make our city inhospitable to companies like L3 Harris that enable and profit from human rights abuses. Northampton prides itself on being inclusive and progressive, yet we host a death factory right in our backyard. Northampton deserves a city economy driven by industries that are life-affirming and in accordance with our city's values of peace and justice. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you so much, Stop L3 Harris, for all your work and organizing on these fronts. Next, we will call forth the prosecution team from the UMass Radical STEM Bloc of the UMass Dissenters and Science for the People, who are going to charge the UMass administration with complicity in genocide.
Good morning, everyone. I am the representative from Dissenter STEM Caucus, which is part of a coalition between us and Science for the People in Western Massachusetts, and this constitutes the Radical STEM Bloc. We charge the U.S. military-industrial complex with weaponizing science. We charge UMass Amherst with complicity in weaponizing science, and we call upon UMass Amherst to take the lead in resisting militarism and creating STEM for justice and liberation. So over the summer, STEM Caucus held a book club and read the book, The Tragedy of American Science, by Cliff Connor, who is an author in Science for the People. It gives historical context to questions such as, why is science in America militarized? Why is research corporatized? And why are STEM students valuable for the military and imperial powers? And the answer is in the fact that science used to be very small scale and research was conducted by individuals with limited resources, but due to World War I and industrialization, corporations in the military in Germany pushed for scientific and academic research to be funded for war purposes. And America followed this example, which eventually culminated in the Manhattan Project to create the atom bomb first for American military use instead of the Axis powers use, where about 500,000 scientists, which were primarily physicists and otherwise, were hired by the Army for research. They were usually not told what their research was being used for, and they could not control how the project proceeded. Operations of this project were also conducted very unethically, as bomb tests displaced indigenous people in the South and Southwest United States, and the Army sourced uranium from mines run on slave labor in the Belgian Congo. This project and research was the precursor to things like the Department of Energy and funded national labs in radiology, chemistry, computational engineering research, and in 1945 it cost over $2 billion without inflation. Research and scientific feats in the United States also has deep roots with fascism and authoritarianism, as immediately after the Second World War, the Army hired, recruited, and repatriated, which means they gave them citizenship, hundreds to thousands of Nazi scientists to work on blueprints for ballistic missiles, bioweapons, chemical weapons, fuel engineering, more atom bombs, and even things like interrogation tactics. This research provided by the Nazis was usually unethically sourced, such as from experiments in concentration camps, and scientists hired by the Army were sheltered from all criminal trials, such as the Nuremberg trials. This was all very valuable and profitable, and this project even established agencies like NASA and other rocket programs, as these things specifically were intended to be war instruments and not for civilian use. Even the father of modern rocket science, Wernher von Braun, was a Nazi scientist who used slave labor for his V-2 missile program, among other. And in later decades, the mass anti-communist panic of the Cold War justified using science for national security, where the government lobbied for more weapons, such as the hydrogen bomb, and had a strong focus on silencing and firing any dissidents in both the government, military, and corporations. The government prioritized only wealthy elite voices in science and used them as secret advisors. One such group, JASON, was made up of corporate innovators and professors at universities who advised the military on new technology and gave research, as well as student researchers, to the military. Most notably, they influenced the creation of the hydrogen bomb and missile sensor development, and also lobbied for the violent offense in the Vietnam War. And even some military agencies were originally intended for civilian science pursuits, but were instead pushed to military use, such as DARPA, which conceptualized the internet, GPS, infrared, radar, AI algorithms, speech recognition, and a lot more. And as a consequence of these foundations, new scientific innovations almost always come from the defense agency and military first. And now I will turn it to another presenter to begin the conversation on how the consequences of this history militarize current STEM students of all levels and trap student researchers into unethical careers. Thank you.
When I was in middle school, I participated in a mathematics competition called Math Counts, and the title sponsor of Math Counts was, and still is, the weapons manufacturer Raytheon. And other sponsors of Math Counts include BAE and Northrop Grumman, which are also weapons manufacturers. And then when I was in high school, I participated in a mathematics competition called the USA Mathematics Talent Search, which is funded by the NSA, the National Security Agency. This demonstrates the lengths to which the military-industrial complex penetrates the education system, even at the middle school and high school level, and normalizes the idea of working for the military-industrial complex. And then there are lots of high-paying jobs that people with mathematic degrees can take, but most of them are in the finance or big tech or weapons manufacturing, where they further systems of oppression. And even academics are implicated, because the students they teach often go on to take these unethical jobs.
Reiterating what was said before, the idea of the military-industrial complex indoctrinating our youth occurs before students arrive here at UMass Amherst. For students interested in robotics, there are few opportunities that engage students with the application of different tools such as programming, CAD, fabrication, and much more. Since I was in the 4th grade, I have participated in FIRST robotics competitions. Although it may be fun designing a robot to complete tasks for a silly game, these competitions funnel a pipeline for students to work for war profiteers. Sponsors and scholarships for the competition include companies like Raytheon, BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin, and many more that I can rattle off. In each instance, they portray themselves as companies providing good, moral opportunities for students by the basis of security and protection. STEM students have become sensitized to US hegemony. This is nothing more than a scheme for these companies to prey on innocent students further down the line. Some of these companies, even listed here, recruit students here at UMass Amherst. Visioning new opportunities for STEM students to engage in as we develop is crucial for creating a world we all want to live in. Here is just one example of how UMass receives DoD funding for robotics. From the abstract of this grant, the objectives are to significantly advance the state-of-the-art in intelligent ground robots and underwater robots operating in highly complex environments, performing surveillance, inspection, and maintenance tasks that rely on effective robot perception and manipulation capabilities, both with and without a human present in the operating area. I mean, look at that. Over $1 million. $1 million that UMass Amherst allows its PIs to receive in DoD funding. This will clearly be an opportunity to funnel students interested in robotics to promote the development of US imperial military technology right here at UMass Amherst, as it receives the expansion of the Nerve Center from UMass Lowell. Although the Nerve Center does focus on assistive and rehabilitative technology for aging adults, its collaboration with the US Army for funding uses this research to assist warfighters in the field, such as through the development of exoskeleton suits for soldiers. Thank you.
So here are a couple of historical examples of STEM resistance and solidarity. In the 1980s, the US government worked to undermine the Nicaraguan government with false propaganda, an economic embargo, and by funding the Contra-terrorist army. There was a large US and international citizen solidarity movement in opposition to work with Nicaraguans on projects and actions here and there, and to witness what was happening and tell the public at home. Among other work, it included STEM solidarity. For example, I was part of a group that helped with research and courses in organic agriculture, and I also helped set up a statistics computer room at an agricultural college in Managua. A group from Ann Arbor built a soil lab. There was Technica, an organization that helped develop computers around Nicaragua. There was Bikes Not Bombs. Ben Linder, an American, was killed by the Contras while helping to engineer a small rural hydroelectric power plant. I and many others have helped with such projects in many other places, and there is a role for STEM solidarity wherever alternative technology and progressive systems are being developed, too often in spite of attempts at suppression. Palestine can be another obvious example now.
So the case of STEM dissent that I will share illustrates some of the same principles just highlighted: the need for science to serve social justice and the willingness of STEM workers to engage in political activism in solidarity with their wider communities. In 1989, scientists, students, and community organizers came together at UMass to protest campus-based research on anthrax funded by the Department of Defense. The researcher denied that his research served military ends, saying that it was for developing an anthrax vaccine. In fact, such research will inevitably be weaponized. It is not possible to create a single vaccine to defend against all anthrax strains, but it is possible to vaccinate one's own soldiers against an anthrax strain one intends to deploy against an enemy. And that is the point that the organizers were able to drive home by working together in solidarity, pooling their diverse sets of knowledge on microbes, on militarism, and on political movements. This is the kind of work that scientists, students, and community organizers can do together to expose and resist the militarization of science.
Science for science's sake, truth for truth's sake, and pure science represent the uncritical pursuit of knowledge without intention. We see this sentiment echoed over and over again, only for that same science to serve death, destruction, and profit. For instance, the Army Mathematics Research Center was created during the Vietnam War to pursue pure mathematics. The reports they released failed to communicate how the math was specifically used to fuel the Vietnam War. Science for the People exposed how the AMRC at the University of Wisconsin was not just pursuing pure science, but supporting war in North Vietnam. Science for the People reveals how the AMRC uses math models to build and test weapons, create military strategies, and even advise policymaking. Science for the People members at the time proposed a People's Mathematics Research Center, one that serves the people, is worker-controlled, and re-inspires confidence in science. They detail in their indictment what these alternative institutions would do and how. This hypothetical math center would solve civilian problems. For instance, can mining companies displacing in northern Wisconsin really bring long-term industry? Or will they lead to high unemployment, exploitation, and displacement? The math models used to build war strategies could be used to build resistance strategies. Beyond criticizing our institutions, I encourage everyone to reimagine what they could look like. More recently, Science for the People held a workshop following the Afrofuturist movie Space to Breathe. This movie depicts what the US would look like if prisons were replaced with transformative justice. Following the movie screening, we imagined what a new world could look like, centering our ideas around Afrofuturism and abolition. Reimagining our world is the first step to enacting it. With this in mind, we reinstate our charges. Number 1, Science for the People charges the US military-industrial complex with weaponizing science. Number 2, Science for the People charges the universities and colleges of Western Mass with complicity in weaponizing science. And finally, number 3, Science People calls upon UMass Amherst to take the lead in resisting militarism and creating STEM for justice and liberation.
Right on. Thank you so much from the UMass Radical STEM Bloc. The ruling classes really start to tremble when science chooses the side of the people. Next, we are going to call forth the prosecution from Hampshire College Students for Justice in Palestine, who are charging Hampshire College with accomplice to genocide.
Hi, we're here to represent Hampshire College Students for Justice in Palestine, and we're charging the Board of Trustees Business Operations Committee. Hampshire College is billed as an alternative institution, yet it upholds the same white supremacy and colonialism as traditional institutions. The Hampshire College website claims that the unconventional educational structures of Hampshire are meant to bring people together to address the pressing issues facing society today. The Hampshire Department of Justice, Equity, and Anti-Racism supposedly leads the collective work to transform Hampshire College into an actively liberatory and anti-oppressive community. In November 2024, Ed Wingenbach, Hampshire's previous president, claimed that amid continued attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the country, Hampshire College will not soften our language or practices. We remain resolute in disrupting the reproduction of white supremacy and inequity. Despite these strong statements, Hampshire has engaged in preemptive self-censorship, shied away from having conversations with students about divesting from Israel, and prioritized Zionist feelings over student activism. If Hampshire wants to be a true alternative, the administration needs to put its money where its mouth is.
Hampshire College has an ESG policy, ethical and social government policy, and the current ethics policy is as follows. I'm quoting from it. The college will not invest in businesses whose products, services, or business practices are inconsistent with the college's values, in particular, avoiding businesses that have significant operations in countries with serious human rights violations, as designated by inclusion on the list of countries and regions named and investigated by the United Nations Human Rights Council or by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. This list will be updated at least annually, but the list is extremely flawed. In regards to Palestine, instead of including Israel holistically on this list, it says West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, and lists the victims as Jewish and Palestinian citizens. The 2023 UN list has both sides' criterion that obscures the asymmetrical nature of the Israel-Palestine conflict in which the victims are disproportionately Palestinian. The list is also quite outdated, as a lot has happened in the past 2 years. Hampshire has almost $300,000 invested in Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, and over $300,000 invested in Amazon. But Google and Amazon have a $1.2 billion contract with the Israeli military, rendering them complicit in genocide in Gaza. Hampshire has over $50,000 invested in Tesla, which profits from the degradation of the Congo rainforest and the exploitation of labor in the global south through coltan mining. Hampshire has over $18,000 invested in Palantir, which sells surveillance technology to ICE, and Hampshire has nearly $220,000 invested in Apple, which profits from Uyghur slave labor. So clearly these investments are in contravention of Hampshire's investment policy. And collectively, the 5 tech giants, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon, comprise 12.6% of Hampshire College's global equity portfolio. Each of these big tech companies are complicit in multiple atrocities. And the Hampshire College administrators seem to be committed to keeping Hampshire's doors open no matter what. But it is preposterous to act as if Hampshire College is worth more than any of the many Palestinian colleges, not just closed, but literally destroyed by the Zionist regime. The state of Hampshire's finances cannot be worth more than the lives of those killed by Palantir or Google technologies used by Israel, and thus cannot be used as a justification for retaining these unethical investments. Last school year, we had 2 meetings at which we presented an alternative list of countries to divest from, and that list included Israel. We have not heard back from admin about taking the next steps to keep Hampshire's investment portfolio from being complicit in genocide. By stalling and ignoring our request to continue conversation, Hampshire admin is proving that they are not truly committed to anti-racism. We demand that the Hampshire College Business Operations Committee schedule a meeting with Hampshire College students for justice in Palestine to take real steps towards an ethical investment policy. By doing so, Hampshire College will be honoring its long history of standing up for what is right. There are also some charts, so those again are the investment figures. Here is the tech giants in relation to Hampshire's entire global equity portfolio.
Hampshire College was the first college in the United States to divest from apartheid South Africa in 1977. At the same time, the administration didn't do this out of its own goodwill, but rather under pressure from powerful student, staff, and faculty activism, including picket lines. This legacy is boasted by the admin when promoting Hampshire. Yet admin is betraying this legacy right now by not divesting from Israel. Hampshire has a relatively small endowment, and due to low numbers of enrollment, is currently facing a serious lack of funding. As students at this college, we are very aware of the daily impacts of this financial difficulty and absolutely want it to be resolved. But if having financial stability requires going back on the commitments that make Hampshire special, then we think the school has outlived its usefulness and should no longer exist. We believe that the usefulness of Hampshire College within the wider higher education environment is as an institution that pushes students, faculty, staff, and other schools to be more radical and create a society that works for everyone. Hampshire has an opportunity to take a clear and principled stance against the racism and colonialism of Israel by divesting from any and all companies with Zionist ties. Any subsequent unhappiness from donors or even politicians is less important than the well-being of Palestinians. Admin is convinced we will lose more funding and support by instating an anti-Zionist investment policy. But we know that Zionists are not the only ones with power to keep Hampshire open. In 2009, Hampshire divested from a mutual fund that included 6 companies aiding in the occupation of Palestine by Israel. This made Hampshire College the first higher education institution in the US to divest from companies complicit in Zionist occupation. Shortly after the divestment was announced, Hampshire admin tried to backtrack and claim the divestment had nothing to do with Israel or the divestment campaign run by Hampshire College Students for Justice in Palestine. Yeah. The year is 2025. Somehow Hampshire is invested in Zionism, racism, and climate change once again. Hampshire administrators know these companies are harmful and completely contradictory to the college's mission. But administrators must practice what they preach by divesting from these companies once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hampshire SJP. In the People's Tribunal, saying the right words does not excuse the wrong actions. Next, we will hear from one more case before we will take a short intermission. And so, we will have one more case after the intermission. And then we will proceed with the rest. So, I will now call to the stand the prosecution team from Smith Students for Justice in Palestine, who is going to charge Smith College with accomplice to genocide.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for making it today. My name is Phoebe.
I'm Anamika.
And I'm Grace. We, Smith College Students for Justice in Palestine, are here today to hold Smith College complicit in the act of genocide and ethnic cleansing occurring in Palestine over the past 24 months. Additionally, we condemn the institution for surveilling students, silencing their voices, and for its failure to uphold its purported values and mission.
Smith's administration as a whole is the reason we are here. In particular, the Board of Trustees Investment Committee and its subcommittee, the ACIR, or Advisory Committee on Investor Responsibility, are responsible for this. Other people in positions of power at Smith, such as President Sarah, deans, and other trustees, claim they have no control or jurisdiction over where our money goes. That is not part of their charge. However, it is their moral obligation to use the platforms and resources they possess to take up ethical investment as part of their charge and to enact positive change. We look to administrators as leaders and role models in our community. By refusing to act and do everything in their power to cut off Smith's material support of Israel's genocide and the U.S. war machine at large, they let the entire Smith community, alums, faculty, staff, parents, and students down. Palestinian students at Smith have to bear this weight the most.
Smith may tout its progressive values, but money doesn't lie, and our investments tell a very different story. As of November 2024, Smith was invested in 2 exchange-traded funds, or ETFs, a Vanguard Real Estate ETF and iShares Aggregate Bond, which has holdings in, quote, aerospace and defense. This includes companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Caterpillar, General Dynamics, L3 Harris, and Northrop Grumman. Lockheed Martin supplies Israel with fighter jets, including the F-53 warplane, and the Hellfire missiles used to target journalists and Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. L3 Harris, which has a branch in Northampton, provides phone tracking devices and other equipment to the Israeli military, as well as U.S. immigration authorities. Because of the nature of index funds, these holdings are also always changing, giving Smith little control over where their money is going and what harm it may be fueling. The college administration continues to deny calls for transparency and disclosure. So although we do not know exact numbers, we know that students' money is directly supporting the genocide on Palestinians, as well as global warmongering. By our best estimated calculation, Smith holds 171,157 shares in this ETF, valuing at $16,987,332, almost $68,000 quarterly, and amounting to about $272,000 annually invested in the war machine. It may seem like a small percentage point, but that is still a lot of money, and any money going to genocide is too much. Furthermore, if the amount of money going to genocide is so, quote, negligible, in Smith's admin's own words, why would divestment of such an amount of money be so detrimental for a school with a multi-billion-dollar endowment?
As an organization, Smith Students for Justice in Palestine has met with the Board of Trustees several times to discuss divestment and other ways of financially cutting ties with genocide. The furthest SJP has gotten is the possibility of Smith making, quote, ethical donations to counteract their investments in the war machine, like carbon offsets for genocide. But we know you can't cancel out a genocide. No matter how many meetings we have, trustees say the same thing, continually stalling and trapping us in unproductive discourse without substantial change. Smith claims on its website that, quote, as part of its mission, the college works to educate students to develop solutions to complex, urgent problems. Smith cannot allege to be fulfilling, let alone trying to uphold this mission, if trustees and admin continue to shoot down the student body, which has been supporting a real solution to the urgent problem of Smith College's endowment, fueling war machines that are actively committing a genocide and scholasticide in Palestine.
As an institution, Smith purports to claim about the issue of ethical investment. On the ACIR's website, they claim they take mission alignment into account, saying, quote, alignment with Smith College's core mission, values, operations, and strategic priorities is the first and primary factor when weighing a request for socially responsible investing. This, along with their continuous refusal to divest from war machines, proves that Smith's values do not truly include social responsibility. We have not seen any indication of its ethical considerations regarding the genocide and its complicity in it, in their financial decisions, or in their response to student activism. Smith College claims to be, quote, a college of and for the world, developing engaged global citizens and leaders to address society's challenges. However, when its students address global issues and the stake that the college has in them, the administration refuses to make any real change or statement supporting us.
As student activism for Palestine spread throughout campus in the spring of 2024, the administration's fear became palpable. During SJP's 13-day occupation of our administrative building, College Hall, Smith hired an external security company, Green Mountain Security, to surveil students 24/7. In President Sarah Willie LeBreton's words from a March 29, 2024 email, this was to, quote, serve and ensure the safety of the entire Smith community. Thanks, Sarah. Campo and facilities regularly walked through the building to scrutinize us. According to President Sarah, these were simply daily wellness checks. Smith also surveils its students in other ways, a symptom of its paternalistic attitude towards its students' body, made up of women and gender minorities. There are security cameras set up across prominent areas on campus that until recently linked to live feeds on Smith's website. These ones are still up. You can watch the construction unfolding very loudly on our campus, but there used to be footage of residential buildings and academic buildings and everybody's comings and goings. This creates a digital panopticon. Through the campus Wi-Fi, Smith can also track students' every movement from building to building and see where they are at any time. This information is kept from students, but now that we are aware, we feel unsafe doing anything remotely organizing related on our phones or laptops, knowing that Smith can see it all.
Despite their suppression of student voices and discomfort at being called out or confronted, Smith's administration changes the narrative in their speeches to larger groups of people. At orientations for new first years, our president has portrayed the administration's response and idea of on-campus protests in a positive light, claiming they are supportive of student activism in its many forms. This strategically excludes the fact that they want us to follow all of their rules when engaging in activism, including their policy governing time, place, and manner of expressive activity, which states that we must disband any sort of gathering or protest if and when they decide to ask us to do so.
Here to speak to their dissatisfaction with Smith's hypocrisy are two Smith College students, Janine and Dylan.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Janine. I'm very proud to stand before you all today as one of the handful of Palestinian 5 college students who anchor a fraction of my people's struggle to our corner of the nation's academic and organizing landscape. I will not speak to what I believe Smith College has personally stolen from me as a product of the Palestinian diaspora through their financial support of an active settler colonial project. Nor will I speak to the infinitely greater theft that I believe Smith College has committed against my immigrant parents, who pay tens of thousands of dollars each year to this institution that falsely promises in their statement of purpose to be, quote, the starting place of creating incalculable good. I will not speak to the deep sense of both betrayal and guilt that I feel witnessing my parents' hard-earned money being directly siphoned into the airstriking of my father's family home, the leveling of my mother's college, the displacement and martyrdom of their family and friends, and the total erasure of everything that once rooted them to Palestine. I will not speak to how unimaginably colossal a loss my family has experienced over the course of this genocide, but I'm sure you all can grasp how irreparable and unforgivable I view this theft committed against us by Smith College. What I will speak to, however, is the utter hypocrisy and spinelessness the simultaneous audacity and indifference that the college administration has exhibited over the past 2 years. In their severely insubstantial and out-of-touch statements to the campus community at the start of the genocide, in their current silence on all political matters, both domestic and abroad, since the conclusion of the College Hall occupation, in their deceitful revision of the campus protest policy to prohibit behavior vaguely defined as disruptive or harassive, and in their two-faced treatment of the student organizers on campus who have been tirelessly fighting tooth and nail against the administration for just an ounce of accountability. I, alongside several of my fellow students, have been demeaned and disrespected to our faces by President Sarah and the Board of Trustees at picket lines, and then have had to sit through presidential addresses in which Smith is praised for its spirit of student activism and change-making. We have witnessed President Sarah sneak passive-aggressive comments into her speeches about engaging in respectful protest, and then have had our time wasted, our activism patronized, and our cause belittled in private meetings with the administration. The dissonance between the way Smith treats us and the way they idealize our presence on campus is so rooted in disrespect, it truly feels like a slap in the face. We are often told that anger is an unproductive and immature response in a conflict, but to be honest with you all, I am extraordinarily angry. I am disappointed. Oh, thanks. I am disappointed in myself for expecting substantial institutional leadership from President Sarah as a fellow sociologist and woman of color. I am appalled by her active refusal to address the historical and imperial reality underlying the genocide. And quite honestly, I pity her for her quickness to admit her own lack of agency under the board when confronted by her own students. Her total submission to the institutional power structures that we have both been trained to critique and dissect for the mere price of a $700,000 salary and a private chef is something that I find indescribably pathetic. So let's clarify some things. When Smith says in their statement of purpose that, quote, "We will be the loud voices that inspire change and the quiet voices that instill it," this is a lie. That is the work that my fellow student organizers and I are actually committed to and actively carrying out. The truth of the matter is that Smith is no better than any other institution. They have blood on their hands. My anger, frustration, shame, and disappointment truly permeate every aspect of my experience at Smith. Sometimes these emotions are the sole motivation behind my organizing, and oftentimes the perspectives and experiences that produce these emotions are what unite me with my fellow student activists. So in that spirit, I'm going to hand it over to Dylan, who is giving our next testimonial.
Hi, Tribunal. First, thank you, Janine, for that beautiful speech. Every single time you speak, it's just fantastic, so I really want to applaud you on that again. And I want to thank all of you so much for being here today in this space with us. I truly feel honored and in awe seeing everybody's faces here. My name is Dylan Jordan. I am a junior at Smith College. Moving to Smith from my hometown of Dallas 2 years ago, I had lofty expectations of living and learning in a kind of leftist utopia, a place worlds away from the political environment I had grown up in. Safe to say, my time here has left me extremely disappointed. In my 2 years here, I have seen so many of the same political issues as I experienced back home, but now they're disguised by Smith's image as a queer, progressive college. Looking at Smith's website, they state that, quote, "As a college, we implement strategic and thoughtful initiatives aimed at making our world a better place." I wonder if this is how they think about their investment in the genocide of Palestine. As a student, I have watched time and time again as Smith continues to shove their good deeds in our face while trying to distract us from the genocide that they have refused to divest from, stating the amount of the investment is, quote, "negligible and entirely indirect." If Smith was truly interested in, quote, making the world a better place, even a cent invested in genocide would be too much. But they're not interested in creating real change, only in maintaining their liberal facade. Smith continually creates new, expensive policies and projects while refusing to divest. They show off their history of student activism while punishing current students for protesting, going as far as crafting a new protest policy targeted at preventing meaningful demonstration. The policy states that, quote, expressive activity must not impede the normal functioning of the college. Do they realize that the systemic destruction of an entire people impedes normal functioning? Smith's actions serve only to bolster their image, valuing their appearance over the well-being of students and the impact of their investment in genocide. Reading the hypocrisy that Smith spouts, I am angry. I am angry that the money my family has pulled together funds an institution that dares to act this way. I'm angry at President Sarah and the Board of Trustees for refusing to divest or even simply acknowledge that a genocide is still occurring. We're still waiting on that. I'm angry at the college's refusal to listen to students and alumni's repeated requests to divest from genocide. And lastly, I'm angry at the cowards in College Hall who are selling their souls for a paycheck instead of using their power to do some good for once in their lives. Thank you.
Yes, we are angry, but let our anger propel us into action. In reparation for these damages, we call on Smith to embrace and protect student protesters' freedom of speech. Smith must vow not to waste its copious resources on surveilling and stifling dissent from its own students. We demand that Smith adopt AJP, or Alums for Justice in Palestine's ethical investment policy, a modified and expanded version of SJP's numerous iterations of divestment proposals. If Smith truly values progress and equality, they will adopt this policy. Refusing to do so only reveals the hypocrisy plaguing this institution. Divestment and a commitment to ethically responsible investment is morally imperative. In an age of genocide, there is no choice but to act. A mere policy is not the end of this fight, though it is something material to remedy some of the harm Smith has done. Above all, we want to see the war machine grind to a halt, freedom for Palestine, and an end to occupation.
Traditional justice systems do not allow us to practice this type of collective airing of grievances and proposal of radical solutions. So we must create our own. The People's Tribunal shows us a vision of a more just institution where complaints are heard and things actually change. So a sincere thank you to everyone who gathered here today to listen to us, and to the organizers of this tribunal for creating a space where we, as activists and people in Western Massachusetts, can gather and share our collective grief and anger. May we see divestment and a free Palestine in our near future. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you so much, Smith SJP. So now that we have heard 5 out of the 6 cases that are presented today, it's time for a bathroom break. So we're going to do a 15-minute intermission. There's a room kind of on the opposite side of the building that's like the break room. There's also bathrooms that are around the corner. You can step outside. It looks probably warmer than it is. And we'll meet back here, at about 1:15, and we will continue with the case, and then definitely come back because y'all will have to do your jury duties. So come on back.
Greetings, everybody. If I could please get your attention. Your attention, please, and thank you. Obviously, we still have some folks returning from intermission. However, we want to keep on time as best as we can because we do need to leave this space today by 3 p.m. So I thank you for being prompt with your break. You will also have more time to stretch your legs during the jury deliberation period if you so desire. Before we hear from the UMass Coalition for Palestine, we want to share with you a message from our guest. Huwaida Arraf is a Palestinian-American attorney and human rights activist. Over the last 2 decades, Huwaida has been involved in a number of legal and grassroots initiatives for Palestinian rights. She also co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, a Palestinian-led nonviolent resistance movement, which has been twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. She was one of the primary organizers of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla and was traveling with it when it was lethally attacked by Israeli forces on May 31st, 2010. In 2011, she was one of 6 Palestinian freedom riders who were inspired by the US civil rights movement's freedom rides of the 1960s and attempted to ride segregated Israeli settler public transport, for which they were harassed and violently arrested. Huwaida is currently based in Michigan, where she practices civil rights law and continues to devote much of her time to activism on Palestine and other human rights and social justice issues.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to be with you this afternoon, even if only virtually. I want to thank the organizers of the People's Tribunal for creating this space that is rooted in truth and in the belief that people power matters. Tribunals like this remind us that while states and institutions may have abandoned their responsibilities, we, the people, have not and will not. And when governments and courts refuse to hold power accountable, it's the conscience and the actions of ordinary people that become the tribunals, that become the law and the justice, and that make history. It's easy in moments like this to be overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we're up against, the machinery of occupation, of apartheid, of genocide, and the complicity not only of our governments, but of the institutions that we're a part of, our workplaces, our schools, our universities, and the seeming permanence of these structures of violence. But it's important to remember that none of these structures are permanent. Every unjust system was built, and everything that was built by human hands and decisions can be dismantled by human courage and persistence. And organizing in all of its forms is how that dismantling begins. I remember when we first started the International Solidarity Movement in Palestine many years ago, probably before most of you were born, and we didn't have a fancy blueprint or funding or an organizational outline or social media. We had conviction and a vision and the hope that people would sign on to these and would join us. On faith alone, we put out this call for people all over the world to join us in the occupied Palestinian territories, to stand with Palestinians in their popular resistance against Israel's deep structures of violence. I had this vision of thousands of people creating this powerful civilian army that would overwhelm Israel's machinery, its tanks, its guns, its bulldozers. But in reality, I really didn't know if anyone would be crazy enough to join us. 25 years later, I can say that tens of thousands of people have come through the International Solidarity Movement, have answered that call, have stood side by side with Palestinians, and now are all over the world doing incredible justice work, including shutting down weapons manufacturers and organizing powerful boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns. The flotillas to break the siege on Gaza began in much the same way, with what at the time, honestly, I thought was a crazy idea, to sail a boat to Gaza when we didn't have a boat, we didn't have money to get a boat, and none of us knew the first thing about operating a boat. Yet in 2008, 44 of us boarded 2 small fishing boats to go and challenge the Israeli Navy, with nothing more than the belief that Israel's illegal siege had to be directly confronted and broken. And our governments were failing to do that, so we had to step up. Yes, today Israel's illegal siege remains in place, but that one seemingly improbable idea has grown into a movement of people from around the world, of flotillas that are challenging Israel's deadly siege. last month saw dozens of boats with hundreds of people set sail to Gaza. And those dozens of boats will become hundreds, and those hundreds of people will become thousands. Because all of these acts are not isolated. Every boat that sets out to break a siege, every person who travels to the occupied Palestinian territory to stand with Palestinians, every tribunal, every BDS campaign, every class, every teach-in, every protest, every sit-in, every march, they are all part of a fabric of resistance that's being woven by people who refuse to surrender their humanity. Together, these acts accumulate power, moral, political, and material, and they begin to create cracks in the wall of impunity that has been built up by our governments. And in those cracks, justice begins to grow. And it's not just justice for Palestine, because we know that the struggle is not only for Palestine. It is over what kind of world we live in. Is it one in which there is rule of law and life and freedom are respected? Or one in which military might makes right and violence, domination, and dispossession rule unchecked? When we stand for Palestine, we stand for the idea that no people should be colonized, that no child should be bombarded and starved, no community should live under siege, and no being should have their freedom denied. The fight for Palestinian liberation is bound up with every struggle against violence, racism, domination, imperialism, and dispossession. Yes, the forces against us are enormous, but they're not invincible, and we are not powerless. We have something far stronger than the machinery of empire. We have each other, and we have truth. Every people's movement in history, from the struggle against slavery to anti-apartheid to decolonization, was told that it was impossible until it wasn't. And the same will be true for Palestine. In those struggles and in this one, every act of resistance matters. Every witness, every organizer, every campaign, every tribunal, they all contribute to bending that long arc of the moral universe towards justice. As long as we continue to organize together with discipline, with love, and with vision, Palestine will not be silenced. Liberation will not be denied. And freedom and justice will reign from every river to every sea.
Now we will hear our sixth and final case from the prosecution team of the UMass Coalition for Palestine, of which, there you go. But first, we will ground ourselves with a testimony from Lebanon. We are centering this testimony here today because for his author, there was no trial and no accountability.
As a member of the Palestine Solidarity Caucus, I will be reading a testimony from Rida, a resident from southern suburbs of Beirut. I'll be reading her testimony in English for you today, thanks to the gracious translation of a fellow comrade. My name is Rida. I'm from the southern suburbs of Beirut, a densely populated area that suffered heavy Israeli bombing in October and November of 2024. Like most in our community, we were forced to flee for our lives in early October. I moved into my son's house in a safer neighborhood in Beirut, where my daughter and her husband, who also lived in the southern suburbs, relocated to Maysara, a mountainous area we believed would be safe. On the night of October 10th, while they slept, an Israeli missile struck their home and reduced it to rubble. My daughter and her husband were killed, along with 8 members of his family, including 4 children, his parents' grandchildren. The next day, we dug desperately through the wreckage. We found my daughter and son-in-law's bodies. The others were unrecognizable. Rescue workers handed us bags of charred remains. We were told Israel had used unknown bombs that burned through flesh and bone. We'd heard similar stories from others before. My daughter and her husband had been sleeping in a corner room, which took a less direct hit. Masada was far from any military zone, just a quiet village where civilians sought refuge. There was no reason to target that house, except that it was part of a cruel pattern. Israel deliberately attacked areas where civilians had fled to seek safety. It is a strategy we witnessed again and again through the war. On November 27th, after the ceasefire, I returned to our apartment in the southern suburbs of Beirut. We were among the lucky ones since our building was still standing, even though many nearby buildings had been destroyed. We spent a few days clearing out the dust, broken glass, rubble, and slowly we made it livable again. After more than 7 weeks of being displaced, we finally settled in. The first thing I did was hang a photo on the living room wall, a picture of my daughter and son-in-law taken on their wedding day. Like countless other families who have endured similar tragedies as the result of Israel's relentless attack on Palestinian and Lebanese lives, we have yet to see any justice served for the thousands of lives martyred. It is for this reason that we are gathered here today, to address the grave human rights violations and crimes against humanity committed by Israel, and to examine the extent to which our institutions, international, national, and within our own campuses, have been complicit in genocide. To speak on this further, I will now yield the floor to a fellow comrade who will outline the relevant legal frameworks that pertain to this complicity across international, domestic, and institutional levels.
Thank you, comrade, for grounding us in this moment. I will now read the international and domestic laws to which we hold UMass and all complicit institutions in Western Mass accountable. First and foremost, we cite the international laws and institutions established to prevent crimes against humanity and, above all, the crime of genocide. We charge the defense with the Genocide Convention of 1948 that states, in part, genocide is a crime under international law which they undertake to prevent and to punish. This includes complicity in genocide, intentionally providing financial, military, technical, logistical, or other forms of material assistance. We charge the defense with the Geneva Conventions of 1949, which makes violence against civilians a war crime. We also cite the decision of Bosnia versus Serbia in 2007, where the International Court of Justice rules it illegal to transfer weapons when there is a serious risk of genocide. Complicity in genocide also violates the law of the United States. We charge the defense, therefore, with the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, which prohibits providing weapons to any country that engages in a consistent pattern of gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. We charge the defense with the Arms Export Control Act of 1976. We charge the defense with the Leahy laws of 1997 and 8. Under these laws, it is illegal to sell weapons if there is, quote, credible information that unit has committed a gross violation of human rights. Finally, we charge the defense with the Genocide Convention Implementation Act of 1987 and the War Crimes Act of 1996, which reaffirm the obligation to prevent and punish genocide, categorizing it as a federal crime. Now, we've also included here the institutional laws from the UMass Student Code of Conduct. It sounds like some of you all are familiar with these ones. Technically, this is not a part of our case proving genocide because, as the code itself states in section 2.4c, quote, the rules of evidence used in federal and/or state criminal and/or civil proceedings does not apply to these code proceedings. But since UMass has used these codes to these conduct code convictions to repress our peaceful acts of political protest without a single piece of evidence, we believe they are relevant and will read them in part. There's a lot more, they're long paragraphs, but this is the cool part. 4.13b, disturbing behavior. And this is what they said we did, right? Engaging with others in or inciting others to engage in harmful or destructive behavior in the context of a group of persons disturbing the peace. And section 415b, unauthorized access, presence, use of property. Unauthorized access, presence in, or use of the facilities or property. These are the laws of the dominant institutions. But today, we read them to inform the judgment of the people. We will now hear the evidence to support these charges from the prosecution team in the case against UMass's administration.
Thank you. I'm here representing UMass Students for Justice in Palestine. I would like, it didn't show up, oh well. I'd like to begin our case against UMass by letting them speak for themselves. These quotes, or this quote, is taken from a 2021 UMass report titled Next, Frontiers in Aerospace, Defense, Undersea Technologies, and Remote Sensing. The report openly and proudly discusses UMass's myriad ties to the Department of Defense through the development of remote sensor technology, exoskeletons for troops, AI-driven cybersecurity programs, drones, satellites, and many other military technologies. But the smoking gun here is the line, "We will contribute to the DoD's goal of multi-domain operational dominance." If you can cut through the jargon, which is no small feat, we need to ask ourselves, what does multi-domain operational dominance of the United States security state entail? It entails war. It entails imperialism and occupation. It entails genocide. UMass, through its participation in research for the Department of Defense, is not merely complicit, it is an active participant in the war machine. There's the other quote. I forgot how slides work. I will turn now to our other main defendant, RTX, formerly known as Raytheon Technologies. Just like UMass, I figured I would let them speak for themselves. Take it from their former CEO, Greg Hayes, who says, "Look, peace is not going to break out in the Middle East anytime soon. I think it remains an area where we will see continued growth." Shame. What do they think about the climate crisis? It's great, it's going to cause demand for their products and services to rise. Russian invasion of Ukraine, fantastic opportunity for international sales. They are rubbing it in our faces. Raytheon and its contemporaries in the defense industry are not mere suppliers of weaponry. They are immensely wealthy power brokers with a vested interest in the maintenance of a war economy. And a war economy requires wars. We'll turn now to the specific manifestations of Raytheon-enabled war crimes. In the latter half of the 2010s, Raytheon came under fire for its sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia, which at that point was engaged in a devastating air campaign in Yemen. The campaign directly killed 15,000 civilians, and over 300,000 more died due to famine and disease caused by the relentless bombardment. There are also several documented instances of the use of Raytheon-made munitions in the massacres of civilians, many of whom were children. Despite their obvious complicity in these war crimes, Raytheon not only continued to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, but they lobbied hard against any attempts by the government to block sales. Their $15 million lobbying campaign, which included over $4.5 million in donations to sitting American senators, successfully preserved the flow of blood money into their pockets. Shame. As one of the most prolific providers of weaponry and technology to the IDF, there are few corporate entities that bear more responsibility for the destruction of Gaza than Raytheon. Raytheon produces several different types of bombs and missiles used by Israel, including the 5,000-pound GBU-28 bunker buster bomb used to level entire city blocks. Raytheon also supplies an array of necessary parts for Israel's fleet of F-16 fighter jets. Raytheon designed the Phalanx system that enforces the naval blockade of Gaza and shoots Gazan fishermen. And it helps to supply and maintain Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. All of this death and destruction has been remarkably lucrative for them. In 2024, Raytheon made $80 billion in sales, a 17% increase from 2023. Their stock price has more than doubled since October 7th, 2023. These staggering figures should force us to confront the undeniable truth. A world where profiteering off of genocide is acceptable is a world that makes genocide inevitable. We must also confront Raytheon's role in constructing the domestic security state. Highlighted as one of 14 giants in the border security business, Raytheon is a major contractor for U.S. Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, with contracts for tracking and monitoring devices, satellites, ground systems, and surveillance and radar systems for maritime drones, among other technologies. It also managed Project Athena, an integrated surveillance system that led to the detention and killings of thousands of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. As for its ties to the prison industrial complex, there is the incredibly disturbing example of the, quote, assault intervention device that Raytheon designed and provided to a Los Angeles prison. Designed as a non-lethal stun weapon, the device, quote, blasts millimeter beams that simulate intense heat, which is described to feel like if you just opened up the doors of a blast furnace. Besides Raytheon, UMass is invested elsewhere in the prison industry, most notably in Geo Group, a private prison company, and Palantir, the infamous surveillance and tech firm. I'm now going to pass it off to my comrade from PSU, who's going to explain the concrete ties between UMass and these horrors.
This tribunal answers the Palestinians' people call for solidarity. For decades, Palestinians have asked us to resist empire by boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel and the US. On behalf of students, faculty, and staff at UMass, I join all other organizations in saying no more to genocide and no more to our institutional complicity. This tribunal is another opportunity to be brave together, express our solidarity, and reject war profiteers. Just a few weeks ago, the student movement blocked the campus career fair because companies like Raytheon and L3 Harris are our university's special guests. Since 2014, Raytheon has paid UMass close to $10 million to defense contracts, labs, and special projects. In addition, UMass invests more than $20 million of its endowment in war profiteers and weapons manufacturers. Take a moment to imagine how else we could spend all that money. Consider what our beloved and beleaguered social thought and political economy program, STEPIC, could do with just a fraction of those funds. My own graduate program in humanities and fine arts is always in financial trouble, and my many union colleagues struggle to feed their families. Let me ask the crowd, what would you all rather fund with this money? But instead, UMass further cements its relationship with RTX, offering scholarships, tuition discounts, and career pipelines. The UMass-Raytheon Special Partnership goes back decades because an R1 university like ours, instead of providing life-affirming knowledge, has become a hub for the war machine's research and recruitment. Raytheon and Massachusetts. But our movement for solidarity also goes back decades. UMass and Hampshire College were some of the first institutions to divest from apartheid South Africa, not because administrators had a moment of moral clarity, but because students, staff, and faculty organized and disrupted business as usual. Likewise with fossil fuel divestment. Today, UMass is proud to have been one of the first to divest and brags about being environmentally responsible. But it was community members like us who pushed the university towards taking an ethical position. Why the struggle today to divest? Because the Palestinian exception is real. We have voted to divest. We have voted for divestment in our unions and student organizations. We have marched and rallied on campus. We have occupied buildings, set up solidarity encampments, held votes of no confidence, and built a broad coalition throughout the valley. We have exhausted all institutional avenues and gone through every official channel and received the same answer. UMass denies our request for divestment and chooses genocide, war, and profit. Administrators have also gone a step further by violently suppressing the student movement for a pre-Palestine. Hundreds have been arrested, beaten, and bullied. Community members have been banned from campus. Students have been doxxed by reactionaries, and professors are forced to censor their lesson plans. Meanwhile, Raytheon gets preferential treatment and direct access to labs, classrooms, and career fairs. We have been given no choice but to call this tribunal and charge the University of Massachusetts with complicity in the genocide of Palestine through its direct and long-standing relationship with Raytheon and the devastation Raytheon weapons rain upon Gaza. We once again call on UMass to boycott and divest from Israel and from the Israeli and US war machine. But more importantly, today I ask you all, our jury of comrades, to sanction UMass by finding them guilty of complicity and genocide. Before I yield the floor, I want to ask that as we charge UMass, we do not fall into their logic of punishment, retribution, and carcerality. Our movement is grounded in solidarity, dignity, and respect for our life. And because we are in the sacred sanctuary, we do not speak the language of punishment. Today, we speak the language of redemption. Today, we take one more step collectively towards building a better world. Long live Palestine, long live the student movements.
I'm back. While students were agitating against UMass's ties to Raytheon well before October 7th, 2023, the first major crackdown came on October 25th, 2023, 2 years ago to this day. Hundreds of students occupied Whitmore Administration Building, demanding to meet with Chancellor Javier Reyes to discuss demands of divestment from war profiteers and the cutting of all ties with Israel. With the building closed and Chancellor Reyes was still nowhere to be seen, 57 students opted to remain and were arrested on charges of trespassing. In a normal academic year, the arrest of 57 peaceful protesters would have been a shocking display of needless repression. Instead, UMass's response to the Gaza Solidarity encampment on May 7th made the response to the Whitmore sit-in seem quaint. To break up the encampment and disperse the protest, the Reyes administration summoned over 200 campus, town, and state police who arrested 138 students, faculty, staff, and community members. I was there on May 7th, and over the course of the night, I saw my fellow protesters punched, kicked, knelt on, choked, slammed to the ground, and beaten with batons by police officers. On multiple occasions, police charged at protesters in designated safe zones, and in one case, trampled a bystander, breaking their leg in 3 places. Upon being arrested, detainees were denied access to bathrooms and menstrual products and zip-tied tight enough to cause bleeding for hours on end. Given the brutality and the lawlessness of the conduct of police on that night, I do not think it is hyperbole to suggest that UMass's decision to call the police actively endangered the lives of its students. And the joint statement of the 5 largest unions in response to the chancellor's response says it best: the crime committed was the equivalent to jaywalking. Beyond its active endangerment of students through its invitation of police violence, UMass has also managed to passively endanger its students by way of neglecting to respond to hate speech and threats of violence. Our comrade from JVP went into the details of this earlier, but I want to highlight the statement by the Council on American Islamic Relations, which states that UMass is a hostile campus for Arab and Muslim students due to the hostile treatment of peaceful protesters and the discriminatory sanctions and pattern of neglect in addressing anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian harassment. UMass is also invested in surveillance and militarization prior to and since the breakup of the encampment. In the past 3 years, UMPD has purchased pepper spray grenades, $25,000 worth of firearms and ammunition, $5,000 worth of red dot sights, $90,000 worth of camera equipment, and biometric data software. Shame. But while UMass has been completely inept in protecting the legal rights of its students, it has been vociferous in its persecution of them. Last summer, the administration pursued felony riot charges against 2 student protesters who were not even arrested on May 7th. Thankfully, these charges were dropped following an outburst of anger and pressure from the UMass community, which should make it clear how bogus they were, but should also make even clearer the necessity of community-led institutions like this tribunal. If UMass will not hold itself accountable, then we must be the ones to hold power to account. In the wake of May 7th, UMass has made repeated attempts to save face, not by issuing demands or making amends or issuing apologies to its injured, beaten students, but by shoring up the legal grounds on which it breaks up demonstrations. The Campus Demonstration Policy Task Force, which was created to review and make recommendations on demonstrated relation policies, firmly upholds the rights of students to free speech with the following exceptions. They present a danger to the campus. They disrupt campus operations. They promote substantial disorder. They infringe upon the rights of others. These exceptions may sound reasonable in theory, but when in practice, they're so broad, arbitrary, and nebulously defined that they can be selectively enforced to shut down anything admin deems disruptive or disorderly. The recommendations made by the task force for de-escalation are also quite telling as to how they want students to protest. The task force suggests for intervening administrators to request demonstrators move to another, less disruptive location, decrease their volume, or suggest for the protest to be continued at a later date and time. The message comes through quite clear. You are free to protest however you like as long as nobody has to see or hear it. I'll now call up our expert witness to give further context into UMass's weaponization of bureaucracy to stifle any attempts at institutional reform. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kevin. I participate in faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine, as well as in the Faculty and Librarian Union, MSP, and in a group called Move Our Money, which is seeking UMass's full financial divestment from the fossil fuel industry. Now, in these capacities, I've been unlucky enough to often have a front row seat for hearing how UMass leaders justify their actions. So I want to address the two justifications that I've heard most frequently from the UMass administration. One is based on an ethical principle. The other is based on financial concerns. The ethical justification is that they must adhere to what they call institutional neutrality. And here they cite a 1967 document written by Professor Harry Calvin and 6 other faculty members at the University of Chicago. The Calvin Report, as it is commonly known, is celebrated by administrators across the United States, including here at UMass Amherst. Now, I'll leave aside for the moment the question of why any of us should feel bound by the views of 7 men at the University of Chicago who clearly felt a bit uneasy about the creeping democratization of their campus and the society that they saw around them in 1967. All right. Now, the central thrust of the Calvin Report was the author's warning against a university taking, quote, collective action on the issues of the day, and thereby deviating from its, quote, neutrality as an institution. Taking an institutional position, they argued, risks infringing on the freedom of students and workers who disagree with the position taken. At its logical extreme, this argument suggests that by opposing a genocide, a university would be infringing on the rights of those who support that genocide. The Calvin Report is based on a false distinction between the political and the non-political. By its logic, divesting from genocide is a political action. Investing in genocide is neutral and non-political. The distinction is easy and convenient. My position, whatever it might be, is by definition neutral and non-political. My opponent's positions are biased and political. Right? Of course, a more honest position recognizes that all university policies are political. Every investment decision, every budget, every research contract is a political and moral document expressing unstated opinions about the way things should be. Now, the argument in the Calvin Report is not quite as crude and facile as I'm implying. The authors do concede that actions like boycotts and divestment by a university are sometimes justified. They were thinking especially of investments and revenue sources. In their words, the, quote, corporate activities of the university, interesting phrase, including its ownership of assets and, quote, its receipt of funds, may at times be so incompatible with paramount social values, end quote, as to require the institution to take a clear stand for justice. The later decisions by many universities to divest from apartheid South Africa, from the tobacco industry, from fossil fuel companies are examples of what the Calvin Report authors had in mind. And it would be difficult to argue today that funding a genocide is any less incompatible with paramount social values. This important nuance in the Calvin Report is ignored by today's university administrators at places like UMass. Right? They cite the report selectively as a way of justifying their current policies, whatever those policies might be. As Harry Calvin's own son, First Amendment scholar Jamie Calvin said in 2018, universities have, quote, used the Calvin Report as a kind of shield. right? Obviously to deflect calls for accountability. The second public justification that I've often heard from UMass trustees and administrators for why we should continue to invest in genocide is financial. Divesting our stock from weapons dealers or boycotting the products of certain firms will cost us money, they say, right? And that will end up harming students and workers alike. Dire warnings about funding shortfalls and thus the need for austerity have been a near constant in universities like UMass for a very long time now. They're a weapon wielded to justify almost any investment decision or spending cut. And since the university does face politicians who are hostile to its mission, the argument for austerity has an air of plausibility, at least until we look at the actual numbers. UMass Amherst and the UMass system have surplus and reserve funds in the hundreds of millions. UMass Amherst alone has run a campus surplus of $100 million or more for each of the past 4 years. Think about that number whenever they argue that we need to cut spending. The central UMass system has a stabilization fund of $164 million that remains untouched. These and other sources of revenue and savings, and these are just two of the key ones, are analyzed in detail in a forthcoming white paper about UMass budgetary decisions. In short, there's plenty of money. It's UMass priorities that are the problem. Administrators' calls for austerity are, as always, selective. To take a relatively small but revealing example, in 2024, UMass administrators spent over $500,000 to repress an anti-genocide encampment and then to whitewash their action by commissioning a report from a law firm sympathetic to the repression. Furthermore, it is by no means clear that divesting from weapons dealers would actually cost UMass anything. The same is true of fossil fuel investments. And here I recommend to you all a database available at the website Fossil Free Funds. It's fossilfreefunds.org. You can filter the database how you wish to select for high-performing investment funds that avoid industries like weapons and fossil fuels. Right? And there are literally dozens of high-performing investment funds that receive A grades for avoiding both weapons and fossil fuels. So divesting from violence is, in fact, compatible with good financial strategy. We know that our leaders are unlikely to be swayed by these arguments. The ethnic cleansing and extermination in the Palestinian territories and UMass's complicity in it won't end simply because we all have law, public opinion, and facts on our side. It will end when our movement imposes sustained economic and political costs on our targets through boycotts, divestment, strikes, aid flotillas, military sanctions, and other forms of collective disruption. The urgent question now is how we can expand the movement's capacity to do those things, learning from and building on the work of our movement ancestors. Thanks.
All right, that concludes the prosecution from the UMass Coalition for Palestine. And now we will turn to the defense. Representatives for the defense, Hampshire College, Smith College, UMass Amherst, L3 Harris, and the city of Northampton, informed us that they're all just too busy today. They sent their sincerest apologies. However, their leadership and legal team put together a collective statement from all of these institutions responding to the charges. They enter a plea of not guilty. And following People's Tribunal procedure, we will now let the defense speak for themselves. Of course, I'm totally joking, right? We didn't even invite them. They've spent so much money, telling all of us all of their arguments, right? Filling up our email inboxes and getting in the newspaper. We kind of already know what their arguments are. So we kind of went back, looked at all of our emails and things, and cobbled together a reasonable representation of what the defense might say under oath with their hand on the holy book. We, the administrative figureheads at Connecticut River Valley, including the administration and leadership of Smith, Hampshire, and University of Massachusetts, understand that institutions of higher learning function as critical cogs within the imperialist war machine. Oh yeah, they were doing this under a lie detector test. Students enter our hallowed halls of learning with dreams of pursuing academic excellence and contributing to a better world. We harvest the labor of our students to cultivate information and vital resources, which in turn enable our consortium's pursuit of scholarly dominance and technological innovation. Sorry, there's our pictures. Our campus members' divestment demands have never been a priority. Year after year, our administrative bodies ignored pleas for financial transparency and divestment. Despite the fact that we are dependent on the labor of our students, staff, and faculty, we choose to prioritize the values and opinions of our wealthy donors and protect our tax-free endowment portfolios. When you choose to rally, we must quiet you down. When you ask for negotiations, we pretend to listen and care. When you use democratic systems to vote, we ignore your resolutions. When you choose to disrupt our campuses for your absolutist proclamations about complex global issues, we are forced to ask the police to violently dismantle your sit-ins and encampments. You call yourselves revolutionaries, but we brand you as criminals. With each passing school year, we repeat this cycle in an effort to exhaust the issue and burn out your collective momentum. For the last 2 years, we have been impatiently waiting for you to give up, accept that that's just the way it is, and to join us in our profitable complicity. We are proud to help build the bombs, missiles, and surveillance technology of the future because it makes us richer. The ivory tower thrives off of the exploitation and the oppression of the subjugated masses. It is more profitable for us to defend our corruption than it is to take accountability for our negligence and hypocrisy. As we spiral into an authoritarian dictatorship, we blame the proliferation of political violence on the people advocating against war, genocide, and capitalist exploitation. When militant hate groups threaten to attack your movement, we ignore your requests for protection. And instead, we usher you into the arms of the very same institutions that we paid to brutalize, surveil, and dehumanize you. No matter how many times you point out our hypocrisy, we turned a blind eye to your criticism. And then we double down by telling you that the violence you resist is imaginary. The genocide is merely a conflict. The annihilation superimposed by the imperial war machine is simply the military terrain of the future. The logic of domination we perpetuate is actually a free market of ideas and knowledge production. Our goal is to keep the students separate from the workers, because if the students and the workers unite, the administration will have no other option other than to address their collective concerns. To avoid this, we know that we must convince the people that they pledge their allegiance to an imperialist war machine that will, in turn, grant them liberty, freedom, and pursuit of limitless potential. Pay no mind to the devastation, the torture, and the annihilation happening day after day at home and abroad. Together, we can sustain the delusion of business as usual. We gaslight, we grandstand, virtue signal, manipulate them into believing that their collective knowledge and research of our crimes is illegitimate. Even better, accuse the people of being intellectually closed-minded, inflexible, and overly prideful. Our evidence is our verdict, and we don't need proof to convict you. But we do ourselves a disservice by picking sides. The role of the institution is to remain neutral and apolitical in the face of injustice. Wow.
Now that you've heard the prosecution present their cases and received some semblance of a retort from the defense, it is time for you, the jury, to review the evidence and to deliberate. The jury has about 20 minutes, not actually 20 minutes because we're running behind, maybe 10 minutes to discuss the cases and to decide whether or not you believe the defendants are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Inside each of your programs is a sign which you will use to share your decision. We have also provided a note card for you to share your feedback with organizers and with judges. After the tribunal, organizers will consolidate the jury notes and share some of your feedback on our tribunal website. Although we don't have time to review everyone's feedback today, we plan to continue having critical conversations about the cases long after the tribunal has ended. Revolution is not a one-time event, and the same goes for creating systems of restorative justice. Your vote will reflect whether you believe the prosecution has presented enough evidence to prove that the aforementioned institutions and administrations are complicit in Israel's ongoing genocide and must therefore be held accountable under international criminal law as well as moral necessity. Please take the next 10 minutes to deliberate amongst yourselves. During this time, you can stand up and stretch your legs. However, we ask that people remain in the sanctuary so that we can get immediately to the vote after you have deliberated. Sound good? Okay.
All right, welcome back from your deliberations. Thank you so much for performing this jury duty service on a Saturday. Very excellent. Okay, now it is time to vote. Unlike a traditional court of law, we are not looking for a unanimous vote. Instead, we are looking for general consensus. When instructed, in just a couple seconds, please raise the sign which correlates with your vote, either guilty or not guilty. The judges will then present their rulings after the votes have been cast, and we're going to go case by case for each of the 6 cases. Okay, starting off with the case of Jewish Voices for Peace versus the UMass administration for their stance on anti-Semitism. Please cast your vote. And it is unanimous. Verdict of guilty. Next, for the case of Stop L3 Harris versus L3 Harris and the city of Northampton, please cast your vote. Unanimously guilty. In the case of the radical STEM Bloc versus the military-industrial complex and the UMass administration, please cast your vote. Oh, wow, this is a biased court. Unanimously guilty. In the case of Hampshire Students for Justice in Palestine versus the Hampshire Board of Trustees, Business Operations Committee, please cast your vote. It is unanimously guilty. In the case of Smith College Students for Justice in Palestine versus the Smith Board of Trustees, please cast your vote. Guilty. Oh, we have a vast majority guilty and one dissenting opinion. That's good. That means we're not biased, all right? And finally, in the case of the UMass Coalition for Palestine versus Raytheon and the UMass administration, please cast your vote. And we're back to unanimous. Unanimous. Oh my goodness. Unanimous, guilty. Thank you everyone for voting. Now that the votes, let's hear a round of applause. All right, now that we have heard the jury's decision, we are going to hear from our esteemed judges for their opinions.
The people have spoken. Amazing. My name is Hannah Mushabek. I'm a Amherst resident. I'm a children's book author, and I am a book worker that works in Northampton, Massachusetts. So today's proceedings feel incredibly relevant to me, not just because I'm a concerned citizen that worries about where my tax dollars are being spent, but because I have experienced anti-Palestinian racism and queerphobia here in this very town. We are instructed to talk about some of the proceedings today and some of our observations as judges. And there were a few moments that stood out to me. One is that our institutions are benefiting from the progressive optics that they espouse. This is one of the reasons why my parents decided to move to this town in the first place, was because it's supposedly a progressive haven. All of these progressive politics and statements that our towns, our universities, and our schools make, as proven today, are clearly not true to their cause and mission. They are paying lip service to what they believe people want to hear while empowering warmongers and profiting from a genocide. And I think this is really, really important, because I think this is what makes it more insidious than people who are explicitly in support of this genocide. Not only does it use us and our progressive identities and our diverse identities, but it also doesn't listen to its constituents in what we are asking of it. I think one of the other things that really spoke out to me today is how this injustice is affecting every single institution in our community. It's not just the universities where students are being brutalized and professors are being censored. It is also in our elementary schools where children are being primed to enter into an industry that profits off the killing of children. And not just that, it's in our own towns. So when people say that, oh, Palestine is not a local issue, I would beg them to listen to some of the arguments made today, because I think we really heard and proved that it should be a concern of every single one of us. I think we also learned today that history is repeating itself, that it is Palestine today, but it was South Africa not long ago, and that there have always been active resistors within our communities, within our universities, and within our towns here that have resisted injustice and oppression, and that truly gives me hope, and I'm grateful to those who brought it to our attention today. While Palestine was the focus of this event, we cannot ignore the impacts that the oppression of Palestinians has on our own citizens here in the United States, and the ways in which it bolsters organizations like ICE who are operating within our communities today. When people say that Palestine is a litmus test, they mean it. All of our struggles are entwined, and when you put collective liberation at the center of your movement, it benefits everyone. I also would like to note that historically, student protesters have never been on the wrong side of history. Trial done. I also would like to point out that the surveillance being used against students and community members are weapons that were developed by the IDF in conjunction with the United States and are used disproportionately against Palestinians. And that if we do not resist that, they will continue to be used against us and our own citizens. I have many more, but I will stop there for now and pass it over because I think we have 3 minutes.
So my name is Isabel Espinal. I'm a librarian at UMass. When I was asked to do this, I kept saying, why me? There's a lot better people that can do this. But I did accept, and then I was asked to say, what brings me to these spaces and this kind of work? And part of it is I've been there for a long time. When I first got to UMass, I didn't grow up with protests. I didn't grow up in a college town. And I thought, oh, they're always protesting. There's all this protest. There's always all this protest, right? Some people are nodding, like, if you don't come from a place like this, it's very new. But when I saw this encampment, now having been here, I've been here for decades. I got here in 1998. I kept telling the administrators, my coworkers, anybody, this is the best. The encampment, you all who worked on that, that's the best, like the pinnacle of protests that I've seen. And I have really come to appreciate protests. But it was like you did create an alternative space, a mini university. You created the best homework, that like if a professor had asked you to do that, that would have been an A+. That's what we want you to be doing. And the community, the local community that came, we talk about community relations. It wasn't, what did they call them, outsiders or outside agitators? No, this was the community. Like, it was so engaging and global, right? That's another buzzword. What more global can you get than to really look, you heard some news, you saw something and you did something, and there was engagement at a global level. It was so beautiful. And I saw a lot of that today. And the work, my God, as a librarian, the information that you uncovered, information literacy, A+ to you. A+ to the library that you had at the encampment, the wellness, the yoga, the dialogue, the invitation to other students, to everyone to come and learn together. That was beautiful. And how heartbroken I was. And people in the community, the day after, we were so heartbroken for you. And it was palpable. I've been there for decades. I would run into people who maybe are more vulnerable and can't even, sit up in spaces like this and say, they just were in grief. So I just want to be a testament to that. So as far as what I heard today, is so interesting, the contrast of talking about things like UMass says that in their new policy, they want to, students cannot engage in harmful or destructive behavior or disturbing the peace. So is the bombing of all these innocent people not harmful and destructive? Is destroying all the universities and libraries in Gaza not harmful and destructive or disturbing the peace? Or, and then also beyond that, because as I listen to what's going on in the West Bank, and then as you going beyond that, as I listen to people who when you listen to the history and the stories, like when we invited Mosaba Butoha to UMass, and he talks about how his family, their land was elsewhere, not in Gaza or the West Bank. That's what they're carrying, and we have to listen to that. Okay, so what else brings me here? I want to say that it's just my parents and the way I was brought up, which is, okay, so they're very religious. So their particular religion is Catholicism. They feel like we're all children of God. We're all one human family, and they always really taught me that. As far as a transformative justice approach, my hope was that I could engage with administrators at UMass, but Kevin, I heard you. I'm not going to hold my breath, right? And so I really heard you when you said, okay, what's our next step? Boycotts, further boycotts, that commitment to that. I want to stay engaged with that and encourage everyone else to do what actually will be effective, which is what I'm trying to listen to.
Hey all, my name is George Abraham. I teach at Amherst College in the English department. Please come take my classes. To all the students in this exact room, or the exact students I want to prioritize my classes. And I'm teaching a class called Apocalypse How, Poetry at the End of Empire, next semester. So, mwahaha. And I have a lot to say, especially about, the noticeable absence of Amherst College in this room, and the fact that Amherst College is the wealthiest per capita of the 5-college system as well, and one of the wealthiest per capita universities in the whole world, actually. Just a disturbingly gross amount of wealth there. I want to start from that material position and really commend every single case presenter here, the Professor Brain On, engaged in some way referenced, I think, what Olufemi Taiwo's idea of constructive politics is. And this is not like a new term. I think that Olufemi Otaiwo said it best, maybe recently, in my opinion. But this idea of abolition being a constructive project is far from new, obviously. But thinking about, it's not just that our movements are like, tear it down, tear it down. As we tear it down, we are enacting and building a new world in that destruction. And every single person who testified, literally, right? And every single person who testified, from JVP offering this alternative definition of anti-Semitism to the folks in the amazing STEM comrades who are talking to, again, the ways that scientific knowing can be used as a weapon in our movement spaces against these systems, right? These are all embodiments of what I see as constructive politics. And I think that this is the future of our movement, is to get creative, to try what we haven't before, to actually do something, even if it's imperfect, even if it's gonna have flaws and limitations. Like, the point is not to take whoever's most marginal in the room and give them a mic. I am one of the only Palestinian faculty members at my school, and that to me is disturbing, not in a OMG, give me a mic and listen to me way. That's disturbing because I want this damn room destroyed, I want the borders destroyed, like literally, materially, so that a new, world beyond the room can be the norm, right? For all of us. And I think that's what Olufemi Taiwo's book, Elite Capture, talks about. So yeah, reading Rex for everyone. And this also is another thing that was recently announced and is not, I know that student journalists are going to be reporting on this ASAP, because there were students in this meeting yesterday, but at our faculty meeting at Amherst College, they announced that the provosts of the 5 colleges have all unanimously decided to end the Arabic program across the 5 colleges. and, claiming, that it's not a quote unquote political decision, of course, and claiming that the program simply wasn't effective. But again, you've now destroyed a program without giving an alternative, without building something, without even consulting. All of the faculty in that meeting were blindsided. We were not consulted, let alone the Arab faculty were not consulted in any of this decision. And it is a horrific violence in a way that, we just spoke about the Mossab Abu Toha event. The only time in my last 2 years with Habibi Mossab where I saw anything like even a glimmer of lightness in his demeanor was when we talked about Arabic poetry at that event. When we think about the Arabophone tradition, and just this week, a student of mine published an Amherst student op-ed about falling in love with Arabic poetry and the joy of discovering this canon of poetry that she had never been introduced to, and how that makes her want to study poetry harder, just writ large. There is tangible interest in these subjects, but these schools want us to be deliberately illiterate in the language of our people, but also in the frameworks to not just deconstruct these systems, but to build new ones in their place. They want us to be illiterate in ways of decolonialism and hyper-literate in knowing systems that will keep us obedient, that will keep us in check. And so I want to, again, bring some history into the space of this is all giving so many uncanny parallels in the righteous George Floyd uprisings, the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, in Ferguson, in so many just long history of Black struggle that, again, I see as so interdependent with Palestinian struggle. And so we would not be here today at the Palestine movement without our Black comrades. So first off, and we witnessed how these institutions shelled out performative money. Anti-Racism Institute number 72, here we go, we'll give you this. And then years later, where are these institutes? Shuttered, crumbled to dust. We witnessed the publishing industry that Hannah and I work with. All these queer women of color, BIPOC women, imprints shuttered. They are giving people this money to appease them, and then they're not giving them the structures to support and sustain. And so this is where we need to get more smart about how are we going to build structures that can support and that can sustain. And I think that this is a lesson that all of our Free Palestine movements can learn from our movement for Black Lives comrades of how to actually build sustaining structures. And, and the last question I'll just ask, as Noura Erakat said, around, about 6 months ago from this day, we were at Hampshire talking, and she was talking about how universities are these systems of knowing, or are they weapons manufacturers? Genuine question. Where when the input of this is money that has been invested in war crimes, that we know this, and the output is sanitized hyper-literate students in colonial systems and hyper-illiterate students in the language of the colonized peoples. What is this? This is an input-output system of directly war profits to sanitized populace. This is a weapons manufacturer at a structural level. And so what the fuck are we gonna do with it?
Thank you so much to our judges. Okay, well, so we would like to ask just one more round of questions for our judges, or a round of legal opinion. And that is, what do you all think should be the reparations?
I'm going to allow my co-judges to speak more specifically about reparations on university campuses, but I can certainly speak as a community member and someone who was recently named in the commission, the Massachusetts Commission on Anti-Semitism, as a perpetrator of anti-Semitism for reading, for reading my children's book, my memoir children's book, which has a fart in it. to local schools. I'm happy to say that after that, 174 teachers and administration from the town of Amherst signed a letter in support of my visit, and I will be visiting most Amherst schools going forward. Thank you. One of the weapons being used against me is the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which states that if I mention my ethnicity as a Palestinian American, that I am in fact, by definition, anti-Semitic under this law and would not be allowed to speak at schools going forward. So my suggestion would be a complete and utter denouncement of the IRA definition, not just in our schools, but in our workplaces, in our government, and all of our institutions. I would also employ all of our towns and our communities to expel all weapons manufacturers, including any complicit tax dollars we receive from them, from campuses, school, and our communities, and adhere to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement.
I was struck by the Smith College folks saying that the president hadn't even acknowledged that a genocide is happening. So acknowledge that a genocide is happening. All our presidents of our universities and chancellors start with that acknowledgement, and also acknowledge what that does to the mental health of all of us, our students, our faculty, our staff. And an extension of that is to have programs, funding, all kinds of programs of solidarity with our colleagues who are students and faculty and administrators of universities and libraries in Gaza that were completely destroyed. That's completely within the purview of somebody who runs a university or is that just makes so much sense. And then as far as at our university, invite our students to rebuild the encampment, have a ceremony of apology and reparations, and rebuild and honor all that was destroyed there. That was more than the material destruction. I have some more, but let me pass this on.
Yeah, we could go on for too long. I think just adding on to this, of course, every single person in our university 5-college system that was fired, that was pushed out directly or indirectly for non-Palestine reasons after a Palestine thing, etc. Having all of them back pay, having them reinstated after their jobs back, etc. Again, this is a labor crisis, Palestine to labor crisis. And with that, a dream, what I like to call this in my creative writing classrooms, what ifs. We have to do this exercise of what if blah, what if blah. My what if is, what if there were a 5-college Rifat El Arir Center for Decolonial Studies? What if? What if our institutions were forced to pay for that in a way that was accountable for the wealth disparities across the 5 colleges, and B, in a way that would at minimum make them liable to pay what they have made off of the genocide, all of these profit margins from this genocide. That is the bar, the bare minimum they would have to pay into this institute, that we could then bring Palestinian scholars and poets here, that we could airlift students out of Gaza and give them a free education here, which again, there have been some great folks at Amherst College doing this work tirelessly and invisibly and behind the scenes to make this happen. And so I know that there are people in these places that want to do this kind of work and that have the literal ability to do it. And so why not at this point? Why not take that money and let us, from a place of decolonial urgency, rehabilitate an Arabic program across the 5 colleges? Why not give us the power to have control over our literacy in a system that is committing not just a genocide, but an act of memoricide and epistemicide against us? And I think I'll give this to Hannah to close this out.
As a book worker, I can't help but read from a book that I think really sums up some of the work that we've done here today. The book is called One Day, Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Amal Al-Akkad. One day there will be an accounting. Even as so, those who did the worst things imaginable in the killing fields were allowed to meld back into polite society. The man who put the bullet in the little girl's head might return to coach Little League games. The patrol that opened fire on the starving civilians might meet up every now and then for karaoke nights, might meet what they did when it was still acceptable, but over the years grow quieter and finally bond over a shared silence thicker than blood. The soldier who drove the tank over the handcuffed body, who heard the sound and felt the rupture, might come home to a high school sweetheart and get down on one knee, and might have some children of his own one day. People who prove themselves capable of the most monstrous things human beings can do to one another might be granted one final immunity, because what's the alternative? To look into a neighbor's eye and see barely visible the kind of stain no amount of reputance will ever wash away. Who can live like that? It's better to move on. There will be people who never move on, who to the end of their lives struggle to unsee the image of the body turned to red paste, the child forced to eat animal feed, the bones pushing against the skin, the slow extinguishing of life at the hands of hunger, the older siblings who must tell the younger ones that everyone else is gone. The hastily dug graves, vast against the horizon, the goosebumps on the flesh of the earth. And every time they hear a politician profess the supremacy of international law or human rights or equality for all, they only hear the sounds of screaming. And yet, against all this, one day things will change. Alongside this ledger of atrocity, I keep another. The Palestinian doctor who could not abandon his patients, even as bombs closed in. The Icelandic writer who raised money to get the displaced out of Gaza. The American doctors and nurses who risked their lives to go treat the wounded in the middle of a killing field. The puppet maker who, injured and driven from his home, kept making dolls to entertain the children. The congresswoman who stood her ground in the face of censure, of constant vitriol as her own colleagues, at the center of her own colleagues' indifference. The protesters, the one who gave up their privileges, their jobs, who risked something to speak out. The people who filmed and photographed and documented all of this, even as it happened to them, even as they buried their dead. It is not so hard to believe, even during the worst of things, that courage is the more potent contagion. That there are more invested in solidarity than annihilation. That just as it has always been possible to look away, it has always been possible to stop looking away. None of this evil was ever necessary. Some carriages are gilded and others lacquered in blood, but the same engine pulls us all. We dismantle it now, build another thing entirely, or we hurtle towards the cliff, safe in the certainty that when the time comes, we'll learn to lay tracks on air. Thank you.
Thank you to our judges. A round of applause. Thank you. We have just one more closing statement. Thank you all. We really appreciate. We should be giving you an applause, right? We couldn't do this here today without our fantastic jury, so thank you. As stated during the introduction, this tribunal is both a show and a trial. We understand that the conditions of our gathering here today are unconventional and somewhat truncated. However, we believe that this tribunal is a critical step towards creating alternative systems and institutions. Now that we have a verdict, we plan to deliver this news to the accused and to demand that they take accountability. Unlike a traditional trial where we reject the carceral violence of the legal system. Our vision of the future does not include dehumanization, isolation, and alienation. The end goal for us isn't to send these administrators or executive officials to prison, or to enact punishment, or to police and to surveil them.
Whether or not they decide to take that accountability, we stand firm in our collective decision-making capacity. Soon, when the day comes, when our movements have organized the people's power and we can finally end this genocidal system and put these defendants on trial, the evidence will be ready. As it was after the encampments, it is difficult to predict what comes next for our movements. Right now, there is a ceasefire that Israel has violated, I believe, at least 80 times. However, if peace prevails, we know there is still much more work to be accomplished. The Palestinian Liberation Front will continue to organize and help build democratic systems which advance the will of the people. Someday soon, when the broad political will exists to hold the accused accountable by removing them from their power to profit off genocide, the evidence will be there.
As you leave here today, we urge you to join our collective movement. To you, comrades watching from outside Western Massachusetts, find the parts of the war machine near you and hold your own people's tribunal. On our website, you will find contact information for all of our different organizations. We'll also be housing all of the resources that we've presented here today, including the evidence from all of our cases, for you to review and to share with members of your community. On Tuesday, October 28th, organizers at UMass, specifically SJP, plan to deliver our verdict to the administration. For more information about the verdict delivery, you can check out our Instagram or their Instagram page. Finally, we have salad sandwiches and wraps for everyone, but you'll have to take them to go because it's 3 o'clock and we really got to get out of here. Thank you for being here today. We look forward to organizing with you.